Well, Ted, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Alina. Thank you so much for having me.
I think you're like my first movie person, movie
Oh,
business.
is
Well,
that a
that's not
good?
true. Yeah, I've had some actors on, but you're on the producing side. Is that accurate?
Sure. And screenwriting, yes.
Screenwriter. Oh, right. Yeah, I know you do a lot of writing. We're going to talk about your book, Addicted in Film, movies we love about the habits we hate. Oh my gosh, I can't believe somebody hasn't thought about it, but it's like every good idea, as soon as you hear it, it sounds obvious, right? It's like, oh my God, of course.
Right. And that's when I started doing research for the book, I got encouragement for some people saying, people have talked about the mythic availability of this kind of book, but nobody's ever written it. And so, why don't you write it? And I started to think, well, okay, well, I've been in the movie business for 30 years. I recovered from an alcohol addiction. I know a lot about recovery and I do mutual support meetings and I work in that space and I love the community. Why not? So that's what inspired me to write the book. Is it nobody's doing it? And so now somebody did it. I'm happy that somebody did it.
Yeah, listen, 100 movies. That's a lot of screen time. What is that, like 200 hours, 300 hours?
Yeah. Well, but I mean, keep in mind, as anybody in recovery knows, you're suddenly faced with all of this time to fill.
I know, right? Like people are like, oh my God, recovery is so boring at first. And I was like, not true. It doesn't have to
No,
be. You just have to
no.
find different things to do.
Well, I agree. And that's why I think, a lot of people get derailed is that, they don't really plan for recovery. They just say, okay, well, I'm
Mm,
going to quit and that's that. But, before you actually quit, I think, a lot of times you sort of have to make a plan like, this is my schedule and this is how I fill up the day. And I watch a movie or I read a book or I write a book or, whatever it is,
yeah.
it's good to plan ahead. And that really helps because I think, idle time is the devil's playground, as they say.
Hmm.
And I think, if you can fill that time with creative things that give you meaning and purpose, that's the double play, triple play.
Yeah, isn't that good? Isn't that the truth? Meaning and purpose, and I would imagine some joy too, because I think
Yeah.
a lot of times, the drinking and stuff is not only anesthetizing to the pain, but it offers euphoria. So it's
Yeah.
important that we find a sufficient substitute that purpose, meaning, and maybe a
Mhm.
little
And
joy too.
I think many times drugs and alcohol, they give you this sort of, very artificial high, this very artificial euphoric feeling, but it goes away very quickly, as we all know. But then when you turn over to like real life pursuits and sobriety, sometimes you don't get the same rush, the same euphoria. And so people, they say, okay, well, I'm going to like journal, and they start writing something down, and it doesn't give them that amazing euphoric satisfaction right away. So they think, oh, well, it's going to be boring, so I'll just bail. And so then they
Yeah.
bail, and then the easiest thing to do is just revert. But if
Mhm.
they just sort of, stick with it a little bit, it finds its own, euphoria. And then you find new ways to train your brain to find pleasure in small things.
No, that's true. Yeah. And, I think people don't give enough credit to the idea that your brain has sort of a skewed dopamine reward system.
Yes.
Like your brain is, your whole circuitry is off, and it takes about a year for
Yeah.
that to heal. It's not to say that you can't experience euphoria or joy within that year, but
Mhm.
it does take a minute to heal.
It does. It does. And, people stick with it. Then, people, I guess they describe it as the pink cloud. At some
Yeah.
point, something happens and everything in life seems so wonderful. And it is, quite frankly.
Man, I just think, it's so funny that you say that, that pink cloud, it speaks to it's like if you're under pressure and you're feeling stressed out and just like all that emotional pain, it's the relief. It's a cloud is in the sky, it's elevated, it's,
Mhm.
floating. It does kind of, so you're
Yeah.
right. There are some people who experience the pink cloud that is sort of that, oh my God, everything is amazing. It's like the relief from all that pain.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the pink cloud comes right away, and people are
Mhm.
just so happy to be sober, and physiologically it feels so good
Yeah.
that they feel great. And then, as what happens in life is that sometimes life happens, and
Life gets lifey.
and sometimes like like you have a problem with your boss, or
Yeah.
your ex-wife doesn't want to take you back now that you're sober, or your kids are having
Mhm.
whatever it is. And then, you don't have the same coping mechanisms you did before. And so sometimes the pink cloud kind of vanishes really quickly and you sort of like get down to reality. But still, it's up to everybody to sort of go back to their pink cloud by finding joy, even in the problems that they have to solve, because that's really what life is. I mean, right? I mean, solving problems. You wake up and it's a problem. You have to
That's
solve
true.
it.
That's true. Yeah, just because you get sober doesn't mean all your problems evaporate. Life is still lifey.
No, it just makes it easier to deal with problems.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're not drinking, you don't have the hangover, the heavy price tag of, I feel like everything that brings joy has a price tag, like exercise, like that is paying the price tag up front, right? In the sense that you have to overcome inertia or resistance or experience
Sure.
like the pain of actual exercise. I'm
Yeah.
not a huge fan, but a fan.
Well, I mean, my Advil budget is like $50 a month.
Your Advil, so you're exercising a lot. Is that what you say?
I play a lot of squash, and it's a very violent sport. And I play people half my age, and I don't know what I'm thinking, but I'm still competitive after all
Good for
these years.
you.
And but I'm in a lot of a lot of pain sometimes. After I play, I can barely walk. But
You have a
it's
lot more
fun.
practice than they do.
Yeah, but it's a nice kind of pain. It's
Yeah.
the kind of pain of having done a great workout. But I do end up taking a lot of Advil. So
We'll call them growing pains.
yes.
Growing pains. Well, usually how I like to start is to play a little game called the lightning round, which is actually very slow.
Ooh,
So don't panic.
okay.
Do you want to play?
Sure.
Okay. As soon as you're
Wow.
like, ooh. Okay. So did you have a favorite book when you first got sober?
I think the Smart Recovery Handbook was really the one that helped me a lot, because I'd read a lot of books about, addiction and recovery and super clinical and, alcohol lied to me and all these others. But I found that the Smart Recovery Handbook was super practical and would actually help me on a day-to-day basis. So I really thought that was a terrific asset. So I really glommed to that book and I did all the exercises and it really helped.
Ooh, I love something that's practical because they say, oh, we need to do the work of recovery. And I was like, what is the work? Just tell me what to do.
Well, the Smart Recovery Handbook it's like a workbook, and it has exercises and you have to fill out things and it's it's a wonderful resource. And
oh, you have it. There it is. If you're watching YouTube, there it is.
Right.
Smart
There's
Handbook.
a Smart Recovery Handbook. It's a wonderful resource. It's got things to fill out,
Oh, nice.
exercises.
Okay.
And Smart Recovery is really based on a wonderful series of tools. It's got like a toolbox. And a lot of these tools is things that you do and you practice in real life and actual life. So, like you're going out to lunch with some friends and somebody orders a glass of wine and you're like, and you have an urge. And so sometimes just mentally you can go through, a cost benefit analysis, which is the hallmark of the Smart Recovery program. You just run through it in your mind. You go to the bathroom, you run through it in your mind, you realize, you know what? I'm not going to order that glass of wine. And then you come back to the table and it really helps you in a practical sense. It's like, urge mitigation, also sort of clarifies your values in a lot of respects. It's very helpful. Smart Recovery is a wonderful program. It has a lot of applicability across the spectrum of use, behavior, substance and behaviors. And, it helps families and friends and loved ones of people with addiction.
I love that. I was going to ask you about that later, but since we're talking about it, can you, it's my understanding, I have never done Smart Recovery. I'm super fascinated by it. I might try it just for the experience, but
you should come to my meeting this Wednesday.
Oh my God. Is it online?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Send me the details. I'll put details. Can we share it with the public when this releases?
Absolutely.
I'll include it in the show notes, but send it to me and I will absolutely check it out. Cause I would love to, I feel like all these programs offer different experiences. Like I just went to traditional 12-step because that was 28 years ago. There wasn't anything else that I don't know if Smart Recovery was actually available then. But anyway,
well, it started 27 years ago, so you just missed it.
Just missed it. I may have gone to that because I had so much religious trauma. I was like, I don't think I could do this. But I was so desperate, I did it anyway. But it was a worthy experience.
Sure.
Is there an absence of higher power in Smart Recovery, or
it's just like the higher power is just not part of the program. It's really a self-help evidence-based program. So when you're doing the work of recovery, it's based on 4 principles. One is building and maintaining motivation, coping with urges, managing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and living a balanced life. And so within those 4 parameters, you look for tools that are going to help you get to the finish line in all of those. And managing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors is really built quite a bit on the rational emotive behavioral therapy of Albert Ellis, thinking, something happens in your life. You, because of the biases in your brain and perhaps past trauma, or perhaps who you are, or genetics, or whatever it is, or your situation, you ascribe some incredible meaning to it.
Right.
And it's a negative meaning, and you react to it in a way which is not based on objective reality. It's a very subjective way of looking at what happened to you. And then your brain is so trained to be like, well, I'm going to drink, or I'm going to use to deal with that anxiety or that problem. When in reality, if you just take a step back and think, okay, I'm going to challenge those assumptions and not believe everything I think, then that really can lead to better outcomes. And just the ability to get out of yourself for a second or two and look at yourself objectively is very, very useful. Actually, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is that when you step out of yourself and you see addiction and recovery in an objective setting, like in a film or in a mutual support meeting, or when you take a break from yourself and think about why you're thinking this way, it's very, very useful. I think it externalizes the experience of recovery. And that I think is very, very powerful.
That absolutely is. Like everything that you're saying, that makes 100% sense to me.
Oh,
I
great.
love that.
Well, then I've got this piece of property in Tahiti that I want to sell you.
I am ready to go. No, I love the idea of thinking about your thinking, challenging your assumptions, and re-examining where did this thought come from? Is it mine? Is it even true?
Mhm.
Super practical.
Yeah. And SMART doesn't really require the higher power. I mean, you're perfectly, if you're religious or you want to think about a higher power, or do AA meetings, there's nothing exclusionary about SMART recovery, but it just doesn't have a place, because in SMART recovery, you're the person, you're the agent undertaking the change and the transformation, doing everyday tools which have everything to do with your practical existence in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no reason to talk to a higher power or hearken to a higher power. You're in charge, you're in control, and you're ultimately responsible. And that's our greatest freedom, is our ability to choose.
Right.
And train ourselves to choose wisely.
Yeah. Train your choose. Oh, that's really good. Yeah, I don't feel like AA is dissimilar in the sense, like even if you do choose to ask for help, like you still have to ask for help. You have to, like, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility, kind of a thing. Like you do have to, and it's more like seeking, in my mind, it was always like, that's how I rationalized it, because I really was, like, I don't have a sky daddy, like the whole man. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Well,
not a sugar daddy, but a sky daddy.
A sky daddy, or the nice man with the beard in the sky.
Yeah, I don't have that.
AA is very profound, and the message of AA is very profound, and the organization is really great, and its place in history was really fundamentally very important. And I talk about that in the book in the first chapter, Lost Weekend, which is when Alcoholics Anonymous, and when the term alcoholic first started and entered the public conversation. It had never been discussed before. And I think a lot of people in these circumstances, and I'm one of them, you reach a certain point where you've tried everything rationally, you've trusted yourself, but you can't trust yourself, and you feel so broken and so upset that sometimes having some faith, some hope, and some external agency that can help you, or that can guide you, or that got you to this place so that you can get out of it a certain way, that's incredibly powerful. And that's sort of metaphysical connection to a higher power, whatever that is, a god or a guru or whatever they call it, or a light bulb, whatever
group
that,
of drunks.
Yes, whatever that
God,
is,
group of drunks.
it has its place for a lot of people, and if it works for them, that's great. And if it doesn't, then there's other options. Now
there's
Smart
other
Recovery,
options.
Life Ring. There's a lot of different options.
So many different options. Yeah, I'm definitely a 12-step advocate, but I'm so aware that there are other options as well.
Sure.
Okay, so favorite books. Yeah, that was, I told you it wasn't a very fast round. Do you have like a go-to mantra or quote or some kind of phrase that has held meaning for you over the years?
Yeah, I just said it. Don't believe everything you think.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
over time, and even at my age and in my experience over time, I do find myself forming beliefs about things that have happened that once they're checked against reality, I realize I was completely wrong, and that
Mm,
I created needless suffering or anxiety in my brain
right.
under false
False
pretenses,
assumptions.
under incorrect thinking, under not really examining my thoughts correctly. And so now, when something happens, I don't do it all the time. I don't do it perfectly. Nobody does it perfectly, but that ability to step back and be like, why am I thinking this? Not a
Mm,
lot of people take the time to do that. They just think it and then they act. And
right.
that's what gets us into trouble. A lot of times, and unfortunately, human beings, especially in this culture at the speed that it's going, there's a premium on acting quickly, reacting
Yeah.
quickly, getting shit done.
Hmm.
But that's not always the best course. And that's why, I think sometimes we laugh or make fun of older people, that, oh, they're so slow. But what they're doing is that they're taking time to really think it through. And that's why they make wiser decisions. And that's why older people are considered wise. Part of that is that they think about why they're thinking things.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah. I'm the over 50 club and I find myself a little bit slower. But yeah, you're right. We are wise.
We are so wise.
We are so
Yeah.
wise. I'm just gonna keep saying that until people believe it. Do you have a regular self-care practice? And that can be like a morning routine, or maybe you have a weekly schedule of meetings. I know you do a lot of service work. What does that look like for you, your self-care practice?
Oh, I don't, well, I mean, exercise is a big component of my self-care, but I
That's
do
huge.
think that getting ready for and conducting my weekly Smart Recovery meeting is my big self-care therapy thing. And I
Mhm.
think a lot about it, and I think a lot about the people that are in the meeting, and I connect with a lot of people outside of the meeting, and I help them, they help me. I mean, it's an incredible community of people that are supporting each other. So when I do that, I come out of the meeting feeling, gosh, I am so glad that I don't have this issue anymore. I'm so glad that I'm part of this community of people who have shared my concerns and have triumphed over adversity and are fighting the good fight. When you're going into battle every day in a sense, and you want to know that you've got allies, and you want to know that there's an army to back you up, so you don't feel alone. That I think is the best sense of self-care, which is why I think Johann Hari said, like, the opposite of addiction is isolation,
Yeah.
or the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yeah.
Um, I said it wrong, but and
I know what you meant.
that's really cool. Is the socializing aspect, the mutual support aspect, is the best self-care I can give myself, is
No,
connection with
that's,
other people who have the same issues.
yeah, no, that's beautiful. Um, what was his name? Johan Hari. He did that TED talk.
He did
Oh
the
my God,
TED
that was
Talk, which is
so
very
powerful.
popular. And he
Yeah.
also wrote a book called Chasing the Scream, which is actually, I talk about it in the book under
Oh,
chapter 4 about cautionary tales. It's a very, in a way, it's a very important, but it's a very sad history of the war on drugs and the way that we've
yeah.
stigmatized addicted individuals, and how we talk about addiction, and he talks about how Billie Holiday was completely vilified by the FBI, how the start of the drug war started back in the 1930s, how Reefer Madness, another movie that I
Right.
talk about,
Reefer
was
Madness.
part
I
of that
saw that.
whole, there's a whole sordid history of how, film was used first as propaganda to sort of
Mm,
create this idea that, drugs were bad and only Black people did them. And, they're trying to rape white women, and Asians are like
oh my
not
God.
understanding their place in the Asian opium dens. I mean, it was all very racial. And Johann Hari brings that out and explains that very well. And I'm glad somebody did, because it's an important story. And I mentioned it in the book as well. I was happy to
Okay.
do that because a lot of people don't know that story. I was getting stoned watching Reefer Madness in high school on the midnight
Same.
movies, and I was laughing for the wrong reasons. Unfortunately, it was a very
Mm,
sad movie when I think about it in retrospect.
yeah. Yeah, in retrospect, yeah, a lot of that stuff. It's so funny when in recovery meetings, I don't know if it's like this in the smart recovery. We laugh at the weirdest things. Like the
Well,
outsiders, they come in and they're
good.
like, "Why are you laughing at that? That is so tragic." But
Yeah.
we get the joke. Like once you're on the
Well,
other
I,
side.
I listen. I think humor is very important. I try to be as funny as I can in the book within reason, and I think I've pulled it off in a funny way. But but one of my other mantras is comedy is just tragedy plus time.
Yes, I was just going to say that. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tragedy
And
plus
so,
time
and in the
equals
case of
comedy.
Reefer Madness, it was the reverse. It was comedy minus time equals tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah, man, our perspectives change
Yeah,
drastically over time. Yeah, some things
exactly.
don't wear well over time. I typically ask people for a spiritual experience stories, but I don't really think I have a clear understanding of, do you have a sense of spirituality? Where are you with like the God thing? Like, what does that look like for you?
I'm an agnostic. I think
Okay.
saying that you're an atheist is difficult to say because it's very difficult to know. There's no, religion is sort of unfalsifiable. So it's as they
Yeah.
say, it's a non-overlapping magisteria. It's a completely different, like, intellectual, metaphysical realm that doesn't really touch onto the rational scientific thing that I understand in daily life. So I can't really speak to it. And so therefore I can't really be the person who judges, the validity of spiritual moments or not. But I can say that, like, if there's something akin to a spiritual moment or like a deeper understanding, which some people, a lot of people have, and they're very valid experiences. Some people have them with, religion or church or what have you. I found a couple of those moments when I was on psilocybin mushrooms. And then I also,
Oh.
I had an experience akin to that when I was once on LSD. And then I also had an experience like that when my daughter was born and I held her in my arms. And
Mm.
so, yeah, there's moments when your brain fires differently and you perceive it to be a spiritual moment that has transcendent value. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's not for me to debate. I'm just saying I had it.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, there has been so much. I'm super obsessed with the idea of psilocybin assisted therapies.
Mm.
I've just been following like MAPS and Johns Hopkins and
That's wonderful. It's a
interviewing
very
people.
promising area of research. And I did a
Yeah.
podcast about it. It's called My Trip to Psychedelic Summer Camp. So I decided to make myself into a crash test dummy. And I paid a bunch of money, well worth it, but I paid a bunch of money to go to Costa Rica and take ayahuasca for a week.
Oh, did you do like a New Life ayahuasca? Which I don't know if you want to say which place you went
It was
to.
called Soltara, Soltara. Shout out to Soltara, very nice
Shout
group of
out to
people.
Sultana.
It's sort of like the Ritz-Carlton of ayahuasca in the jungle. It was wonderful.
Yeah, buddy, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it
No,
was
I mean,
great.
yeah, there's so this is a recovery podcast and I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on the internet. So that's my disclaimer. But I
Yeah.
have seen, I haven't done it myself, but I have interviewed people and talked with people who say it's medicine. It's like 10 years of therapy in a single evening. And, while I practice abstinence, I don't see it as a relapse.
Mhm.
I don't see
No,
it as
I don't
a,
think you should see it as a relapse. I
yeah,
mean, and you're not going
I
to get
don't.
addicted to psilocybin mushrooms. You'd be completely non-functioning and you wouldn't be able to do regular life. And quite frankly, having the experience of doing mushrooms or LSD, you don't necessarily want to immediately go back to using those drugs.
No,
Sometimes the experience is so powerful and transcendent or whatever. And then you do what's called reintegration, which is
right.
that you start to see that the things that you learned on that trip have these great applications in your emotional health and your well-being and how you see the world. And when you start to see that in practice, it becomes so powerful that whatever issue you have psychologically perhaps has been resolved, or you've moved
Right.
forward in your life psychologically or emotionally, and the work is done and you're done.
It's my understanding that it addresses root cause and helps to reformat your default mode network, your brain's operating system. And I know that set and setting is very important. Your
Yes.
intention going in is very important
Hmm.
to allow the experience and to have a guide that'll keep you safe or help guide you
Yeah.
through that process. Because it's my understanding that it involves the disillusionment of the ego, which is a mechanism in your mind to help,
Hmm.
like put up these survival mechanisms to, but it also creates, I want to, I can't speak this morning, but it creates dysfunctions. It creates like disillusionment and things like
Yeah,
that.
it's LSD specifically is a very, very powerful drug. And when you first come on with LSD, it's a very uncomfortable feeling because it's so new and it's so bizarre, and you're sort of like
Disorienting.
trying to figure out what that all is. But then when the visuals kick in, but then, that to me was kind of annoying. It was like, I don't really need all the, melting walls and things like that. It's nice. It's very nice, but
It's
I can see
nice.
that in Fantasia if I want to. I was like more interested in like, what I was going to be thinking or communicating. And
Right.
so when I started to communicate with other people and think and talk and feel and whatever, that's when I realized how powerful it really was, because
Yeah.
the things you talk about get really profound.
It gets to root cause, and
Yeah.
maybe you can reframe different experiences and thoughts that no longer serve you. I hear ayahuasca commonly referred to as mama ayahuasca, because it sort of facilitates like this connection to Mother Earth. Was that in your experience?
I'm not sure. Well, what my understanding of ayahuasca is, and the Shipibo tribe that do it, and all the other tribes that do it, I think it came from sort of like a religious context, a
Yeah, it's a
totemistic,
ceremony.
sort of like a shamanistic background, which has to do with symbols and metaphors. And so doing the drug was one thing, but what was happening was sort of like a quasi-spiritual experience. And they saw it in that context. And that's why ayahuasca and sometimes psilocybin mushrooms and drugs in some Indian cultures, Native American cultures, have been legalized because they're part of a sacrament. And that's wonderful. And if that's part of it, then that's great. But then when you transfer that over to like the popular people of like tourists like me who are going down to Costa Rica to take ayahuasca for psychological, perhaps not necessarily spiritual reasons, but for psychological experiential reasons, then they do kind of want to give it the sheen of respectability by mentioning the sacred background to it. And sometimes they kind of overdid it, but I was like, okay, I'm around a lot of people from Northern California, and they're
A
like
lot of
all
woo
into
woo.
a lot of woo-woos, and that's totally fine. I'm comfortable
Yeah.
around people like that, and I
Yeah.
wasn't going to be the fly in the ointment that said there is no empirical evidence for this assertion. But
Yeah.
I think giving it that sort of given it the association with the spiritual experiences actually can be very powerful for some people, because it sort of says, well, ayahuasca is my conduit towards something divine, universal, timeless, eternal. And that could be very powerful. And if that's
Absolutely.
what your intention and mindset is going into it,
That's what
you
you
have probably a greater likelihood of having that very same experience, because as you said, setting and context is very important. So if you go into it wanting, expecting, demanding to have one experience, you won't have it. But if you go into it open to having some experience, you'll probably have it.
Yeah, that's well said. I should probably get off of that, because it's it's not widely accepted in the recovery community, but I think it's going to be. A funny story. Bill Wilson actually took LSD before he wrote the 12 and 12 and wanted to make it part of the 12-step program. I thought that was
I know I
interesting.
mentioned that in the podcast episode that I did. Yeah.
Did you? Yeah,
Yes.
that was so good. Okay, well, I want to take a step back to talk about like, how did we get here? We're here because, you and I both share the same affliction with, alcohol use disorder. I'm so curious about, I want to know more about your role in the movie industry.
Mhm.
And, when did you decide it was a problem?
Well, I worked for two studios. I worked for Universal and Warner Brothers, and then I worked in international sales, and and just several sides of the business. And a lot of that was international travel, was parties, buying drinks for clients, buying drinks for movie stars, going to I mean, it was like parties. It was, every year I went to the Cannes Film Festival for like 20 years, and every time I was there, it was like you would work, you would do your business, you do everything, and then it was drinks and up until 2-3 o'clock in the morning. And you had to do that. You had to be at the parties, you had to be networking, you had to be handing out your business card, you had to be looking for a deal or closing a deal or proposing a deal or trying to meet with that producer because they had a project and you need to like, hey, come on over here, I want to buy you a drink. Let's talk about your. So there's a lot of that, and a lot of first class travel and, first class lounges, and there's just alcohol everywhere. And for a long time, it was fantastic. I didn't feel like I had a problem with it at all. But then I transitioned into being working on production of films and financing of films, and also as a screenwriter. And I met with some success as a screenwriter, but with that business and producing and being an independent contractor, you have you have periods of great work and then periods of just waiting around for things to happen. And I started to fill that time waiting around for things to happen with alcohol, because I was either bored or just didn't want to start something, or was trying to procrastinate, or was frustrated that that they hadn't made the movie the way I wanted, or what have you. And so then it became an issue where I was like almost dependent on alcohol. And so I decided, well, this is stupid. So I eventually, over time, I quit. Then I relapsed, and I quit. Then I relapsed, and then I eventually got my shit together. And a lot of it was thanks to smart recovery and turning to the one thing that I love the most, which is movies. So I sort of barricaded myself in my house for 100 days, and it was probably like a little bit more than that. But and then I watched 100 movies, and probably a couple more than that. And then I started to see patterns in these films and wonderful teachable moments and takeaways. And again, as I said at the beginning, I sort of saw an objective representation of addiction, and I saw myself in some of these characters. So, the experience of addiction and recovery, the struggle, which was so subjective in my own mind, became played out on screen that I could watch and interact with and learn from. And so I decided to write the book based on, how I thought movies about addiction and recovery can really help people heal, and have a lot of things to say about addiction and recovery, and also the nature of addiction itself. There's a big conversation going on in the world right now about, what are the best practices? What are the ways to tackle this? I mean, the Washington Post has done an incredible 2-day long, series about fentanyl crisis, and, and so there's different approaches to seeing addiction, harm reduction, medically assisted treatment, non-abstinence only, paying people to stay sober, it has political dimensions as well, social dimensions, moral dimensions, and all that stuff I wanted to cover using movies as a way to talk about a lot of those topics in a way that was, which was interesting and at times fun and at least entertaining. And I think a lot of people said that I kind of achieved that goal. So I'm really happy with the result. It was like a lot to bite off and chew on, but I think it worked. I think people are enjoying that aspect of the book, as the bigger messages about what those movies can teach us about addiction recovery.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's just, it's such a brilliant idea because people learn through stories. I have attended meetings and I hear people's stories, but I think it's so cool that you got the takeaway from all these different movies. Can we talk about some of the movies that you
please.
reviewed? Do you want to start with some of your favorites?
Oh yeah. Well, what I wanted to achieve in the book is I wanted to give sort of like some movies that are really iconic and very important in the pantheon of films about addiction and recovery, which I think are sort of like must-sees. And I think Lost Weekend is a really important film. It's one that I've seen at least 10 times, 11 times. I watch it every couple of months or so, and I always find something different. But Lost Weekend was made in 1944. Ray Milland, his agent, his manager, everybody said, this is going to kill your career. Don't make this movie. It's horrible. Billy Wilder, the writer-director, could barely get it financed. Paramount Pictures, once the movie had been made, Paramount Pictures got an offer from a liquor company for $5 million to scrap the film, throw it in the trash, never release it. Please don't do this. It's going to hurt our liquor sales. There are a lot of groups of people that were really adamantly opposed to the release of this film. Paramount thought, what, this is such a Debbie Downer. The war is over. We want nice, joyous films about people dancing and having fun and Fred Astaire. Why are we doing this movie again? And yet they released it, and it was not a huge box office success at the beginning, but it was a huge critical success. And it's the only movie and it won an Oscar for Best Picture for the film. It won Best Director, it won Best Actor. And it's one of the only films, I think it's the only film to actually win the Palme d'Or and the Best Picture Oscar in the same year. And so the film really had legs. And what's important about the film is it really has everything, especially if your thing is alcohol addiction. But it does speak about addiction in general, but it's specifically alcohol addiction. It has everything: 5150 psychiatric holes, rationalizing, compartmentalizing, people that are actually trying to help but actually hurting you, codependency. It just has everything. It even has the sympathetic, prostitute with a heart of gold. It just has everything. And more importantly, it has, look at what detox is, delirium tremens. It has like the scary part of alcohol addiction and the sad part too. And then at the very ending of the film, I won't give away the ending, but the ending of the film is probably as one of the more profound things to say about the nature of addiction and recovery. And I'm not going to give that away. I would love for you to read the book and tell me what you think, but there's something so profound to be learned from the ending of that film that's why I wanted to include it first. And then, again, talking about other important films, you can't, do a book like this without talking about Leaving Las Vegas.
Oof, I was just going to ask you about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we and I talked about that one. I think that one came out a year after I got sober.
Right.
And it was too fresh for me. It was so painful to watch.
It's a tough film. But, movies like that, even though, again, I don't want to give away the ending, but it doesn't really necessarily have a happy ending. But all of us in recovery, it's important to realize that not every story has to have a happy ending. And in fact, it's what we can learn from unhappy endings that really pushes us forward. Like in a very microcosmic point of view, I see this in my Smart Recovery meetings that I facilitate every Wednesday. Somebody will say, I had a relapse. So that to them is a tragic ending. But I'm like, well, that's not the ending of your story. That's the beginning of a new story where you use everything that you learned from this failure or this perceived failure to move on with your life and make better choices next time. So everybody's writing the sequel to their tragic movie every time they get up in the morning. And so Leaving Las Vegas is like finite in its time and space. But if they made a sequel to that film, which they never will, but if they made a sequel to that movie, Sarah, the prostitute with the heart of gold, would move on to be a social worker who helps people in recovery and has a triumphant story of her own because she learned something about the nature of addiction in that film. So, every tragedy leads to, again, plus time equals comedy.
Yeah, that's true. No, I felt like that movie actually had two endings.
Yeah.
In a way, and I'm going to really try not to ruin it, but it did have for me, it had two endings, and it ultimately a peaceful one for Sarah.
Yeah, those are important films to talk about. And I think also one that I really found was very, very helpful, especially people who, like us, who realize the value of mutual support, help and meetings and things, is a film which is very much a popcorn movie, very much a star-driven confection called Thanks for Sharing. And it has Tim Robbins and Gwyneth Paltrow and John Ruffalo and Pink. And
Pink is in that one?
Pink is in it. She steals the movie, really. And Josh Gad. And it's wonderful. Originally it was marketed, or they tried to market it as a movie about sex addiction because it's a 12-step meeting for sex addicts.
Okay.
And yet really very, very slowly, and you realize it's really not a movie about sex addicts. That's, I think, sort of like the cherry that they were sort of dangling, or the carrot that they were dangling in front of
the temptation.
Public's face. The temptation. But really, it's a profound meditation and a wonderful story about 12-step and the nature of addiction and family and friends and how to get healthy. It has a wonderful ending. It has a lot of dynamics, a lot of great things to say about the nature of addiction recovery. That's actually the longest chapter I wrote because there was so much in that film. Oh. And it's sort of like this movie that's laying in plain sight. I'd never heard of it. And then somebody said, "Oh, have you seen Thanks for Sharing?" I'm like, Gwyneth Paltrow? I don't know, man. I'm not going to watch a movie with Gwyneth Paltrow having, getting it on with Mark Ruffalo. I don't know. But then I saw the movie. I'm like, wow, it's so much more than that.
Yeah, I really love Mark Ruffalo. I don't have anything against Gwyneth Paltrow either. But
she is she's wonderful in this role. She's a beautiful woman. The whole Goop things sort of like put her.
That's a
like people have some negative thoughts about her, but she's a wonderful actress, a very, very sultry, wonderful actress in this role. She plays it very, very well.
I mean, we're all human, right? We all have a little, even in the yin and the yang, we all, even the worst of us have a little bit.
Although I will caution your audience, it does have probably the worst on-screen kiss I have ever seen in my life. So just look away.
Look away and cover your ears.
Away, cover your eyes.
Look away.
Horrible.
Away.
It makes you want to swear off kissing anybody ever again.
Ew. I disturbingly want to watch it now.
Well, it's true. And I tell this funny story in the book about how I actually was the victim of a screen kiss gone terribly wrong, because I was hired by one of my ex-university students, because I taught screenwriting internationally. And one of my ex-students who had access to some funds actually financed a movie and produced it and said, would you be in the movie as an actor? I was like, I'm not really an actor, but I play one on TV. So I flew down to Cartagena, Colombia, and I was in this movie and I played this role. And the scene was that, like, my wife comes out of a coma and she's so happy that she kisses me. And I'm like, okay, so she kisses me, she's going to be disoriented. But no, in the way that they shot the film, the actress, I guess, thought I was kind of cute. So she knew I was married, and I was very clear about that. But at the time,
that doesn't matter.
But she came out of it and like gave me this really crazy on-screen wet and sloppy. I was like, whoa! And it's in the movie. I'm not going to tell you what the movie is because I don't want
you're embarrassed by it. You don't want anyone to see it.
I don't want anyone to see it. I don't even want to see it.
I don't want to see it. I'm so sorry you were assaulted in that manner. I would imagine someone out of a coma.
I felt like I had been sort of like semi-raped, but it was not that. It was not the worst thing that ever happened to me.
I can't imagine. Let's see. And of course you had to include When a Man Loves a Woman. Well, that was Meg Ryan and Randy.
Oh, that's
Garcia.
That's another huge film. And Louis Mandoki, who I know and interacted with and tried to do a multi-picture deal with when I was at Universal. Lovely man, really one of the great directors of romance that really sort of made a real career for himself in Hollywood, much before this new wave of like Alfonso Cuarón and Carlos Cuarón and Iñárritu and Guillermo del Toro. He sort of set the stage for the Mexican diaspora of creative talent that's come to Los Angeles and Hollywood and really done so well. And he's a wonderful director, very thoughtful, and When a Man Loves a Woman, when you watch it again, and when I watched it with an eye towards like, what is this teaching us about what a relationship looks like when one person has a problem, the other person doesn't? What does it look like when a marriage goes through this kind of a calamity? Nobody had ever explored that before. And he did so, Lewis did so in a very even hand. And the result is something where you can learn a lot about not just, what Meg Ryan goes through in her life in recovery and going to rehab, et cetera. But the story also is about how the husband actually has to go through a transformation himself and how he's perceived his wife all along. Like, was he complicit in, Jerry, what's his name? Jerry, not Garcia. Andy Garcia. So, was he complicit in his wife's alcohol problem because he really encouraged her to go out and drink and have a good time and be all sexy and fun? A lot of guys sometimes inadvertently will sort of like look the other way when their wives or girlfriends are drinking a lot because it makes them fun, and it makes them like the fun first date that they always wish that they had. And yet that's not, over time, that might not be the best thing for her. And so I think Andy Garcia has to come to terms with that. And then he's a control freak, and he figures, she's going to go to rehab. I'm going to get her to the best rehab. I'm going to check that box. Okay, now that you're out of rehab, we're going to get you a whole new thing, and we're going to check that box. And I'm going to make sure that you do this and do that. And Meg Ryan's like, well, hold on a second. This isn't about you. This is about me. And that's hard for a control freak to take. And also, as you realize, a lot of people who are supporting people who are addicted, they have a sense of resentment that once that person is healed, they feel like they're owed something. They're owed an explanation. They're owed an apology. They're owed something. And I talk about how that can be a very disruptive influence, is how the person who comes out of rehab and is now suddenly your wife again or husband again might not be the same person who went in. And so the dynamics of why you were in love or how you're in love have to be completely recalibrated. And that's not always easy. And it takes additional work, but the work itself, I think, is incredibly important, because somebody going into rehab might be the best problem that your marriage ever has, in the sense that it really lets you reevaluate it and recommit at a deeper, higher, sober level. And if it works at that level, then it's going to work. And then if it doesn't work, maybe it's because, alcohol or substance use was something which was skewing the results and giving you impression that you were in a successful relationship when perhaps you weren't. And that's what really comes out in the movie. It's very important. And it also comes out in a very important movie about relationships, in the chapter which I call the Menage a Trois with Alcohol, which is Days of Wine and Roses, where Lee Remick and Jack Lemmon are sort of like in this love affair with alcohol, and they're both super, drinking a lot. And then, Jack Lemmon decides, I can't do this anymore. And he stops, and then he tries to get his way, and he starts doing AA meetings, and he does his testimonial, and he does the steps, and he comes out of it. And I don't want to give away the ending again, but it's very difficult when, a relationship that was built upon alcohol suddenly doesn't have that ingredient anymore. And like, will that, without the menage a trois, will that couple stay together? And so it's a wonderful rumination on couples and alcohol, and love and alcohol, and how alcohol and drugs sometimes skew our version of affection and our understanding of love itself. Because in a way, addiction is a very selfless undertaking. And really, if we love somebody who allows us to drink, are we loving them? Or are we loving the person who allows us to drink? And if they don't allow us to drink anymore, do we love them anymore? That's a hard way to say these things, but in a sense, those are things that these movies force us to think about.
Yeah, those are really important questions to answer, right? Yeah. Especially if you're in a relationship. I wasn't in a relationship when I got sober, but certainly I have heard women talk about how after they got sober, like the husbands who don't have a problem are like, I kind of miss the girl you used to be, the fun and frisky. And so there is this reorienting process to what do I value? Can you let go of the control? Can you be okay?
Yes.
It does force them to look at their part in the role. Yeah. Because don't we find that people are like, I'm not the problem, they are. They don't look at me. Like,
you got to keep your side of the street clean. And I do. And I mentioned that it's a very funny part of the book is when I started talking about that, I prefaced the discussion of those two movies with some statistics, which I found alarming and whimsical, which were like, they did a study at Northwest University, and married couples who drink together report much higher levels of marital satisfaction. And those couples that don't drink together tend to get a little snotty with one another and have higher levels of discord. And it's very funny. And another kind of a weird finding was that when women drink with other women outside of their marriage, they report very high levels of marital satisfaction with their husbands, because they feel that like they have a venue to go out and hang out with other women and talk, and it gives them that sort of ability. And men are fine with that. But if you turn it around,
or they're numb to their feelings.
But if you turn it around, and women are not very happy when men go out with other men to drink. And so they report a high level of dissatisfaction when their husbands come home drunk from like a football game or whatever. And so that leads to marital discord. So
that's because when y'all get together and drink, there's like other women involved, there's strip clubs.
I mean, you don't have to tell me. I get it. I wasn't that kind of a guy, but still, it's very funny that when you think that, studies do prove, they show conclusively that higher reported levels of marital satisfaction increase.
Well, I mean, that's subjective data,
well, it's also time bound, because you're asking somebody in the first couple of years of their marriage, we love each other, but cut to 2 years later and it's a shit show.
It's a shit show, literally. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting, these findings, like when you said that people that drink together have a higher, like they're reporting higher levels of satisfaction. Well, they're anesthetized, they're using the drug as a euphoria tool, and so of course they were going to report that they're happy. And those are the people that are in denial about negativity. So they're not going to share the bad side. And conversely, the people that are sober, they're more in touch with their feelings. And so they can't hide behind the alcoholism. So I find those, those definitely are not scientific studies. They're
anecdotal.
And anecdotal, super funny.
And then, like you know what I mean? Like somebody would use that as proof to like, you see, honey, we have to drink to be happy. That's the only way our marriage is going to survive. But I mean, that's there's actually there's a wonderful film that explores that. It's called Smashed. It's on Hulu or Netflix or something.
Oh, it's out now.
and I can't remember who but it's very easy to remember. Smashed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about this young couple who are married and alcohol gets the better of them and they try to figure out what to do about it.
Yeah. What about, you reviewed 28 Days? What was your takeaway from that one?
Oh yeah, 28 Days, that again, that's a very Hollywood confection, very commercial director,
Is that
commercial
Sandra Bullock?
star. Sandra Bullock, yes. But the wonderful thing about that was that, it was the first time that really, the first movie about rehab that had ever been made was Clean and Sober. And that was sort of like a very gritty look, Michael Keaton, et cetera. And definitely very heroic story, difficult for some to swallow, didn't do well financially, but, is recognized as a very important film in the list of movies about addiction recovery and a must see for anybody in recovery, I think. But 28 Days was wonderful in the sense that it wasn't gritty. It's sort of like when Sandra Bullock goes to rehab, it's sort of like this Disneyland of rehab. It's like a great place where everybody has kumbaya moments and they watch TV together and the food is awesome and the accommodations are great. And it's sort of like a sober Disneyland, like a sober staycation, as it were. And in a sense, yeah, not every rehab is like that, but some are. But it does paint a very fair portrait of what rehab is. And it does, while it's showing all the nice things about rehab, or all the pleasant things, it is showing the negative aspects of rehab on a personal level, like, the shakes, the DTs, the problems, the boredom, the, frustration, the anxiety of going through that program, all the conflicts that arise out of that, a spouse who comes and tries to slip you a bottle of Vicodin because like, oh, you're just checking the box here. When you come out, everything will be back. Don't let them tell you that you're an alcoholic. It's not true. That's ridiculous. You're just doing this because you got the DUI. You'll be right as rain as soon as you get out. And it's got a lot of those aspects of like what people in rehab go through. And it's portrayed nicely in a very glossy setting, and it didn't popularize because it wasn't trying to popularize anything. It was just trying to be an entertaining film, but it did show recovery to a large group of people that would never see a movie like that or would not know a lot about that topic. And I think in a way it destigmatizes addiction and addicts. And it shows, a very important side of what 10% or 15% of people in the United States may at some point go through because they get in trouble with drugs or alcohol. And so by showing that and showing it in a very positive light, I think it really did wonders for the recovery industry, and showed that, it's not a scary place. It's not a death sentence. It's a place where you go and you get better and they help you and they can help you. And more importantly, I think it showed that if you go to rehab with utter intentionality, instead of wanting to just check a box, that it will work for you if you have the intention of having it work and the honest desire. And I think really that's the ultimate takeaway of the film is that, I don't think I think her name is Megan in the movie, but the ultimate thing that she learns in the experience is not so much going through rehab, it's just finally being honest with herself and realizing, you know what? Yeah, I'm that person who crashed the car and could have killed a child. And I was an addict and I am an addict and I need to fix this. And when you are brutally honest with yourself in rehab and face that, that's the aha moment that rehab is really trying to do on many levels. And I think the results for people coming out are much more positive than somebody who just checks a box. So for the first half of the movie, she's just checking a box. And then for the next half of the movie, she's figured it out. And then where does she go from there? And that's how it has a heroic. And Sandra Bullock portrays that really well. She's a wonderful actress in this. It's a very entertaining movie. It's a wonder, and it's funny. It's got some great funny moments as well. Because again, tragedy plus time equals comedy.
Yeah. And I really feel like, as we, watch these movies, we can identify parts of ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's parts of us that you talked about being in denial about our behavior. You talked about, what your intention is going in isn't always what happens coming out, like checking a box versus, a little bit of time, you let these ideas marinate in your mind and it changes you as a person. How I'm sure we could talk all day about all these movies. How has this, I know you do a lot of work, you did a lot of work with Smart Recovery on yourself, right? And how long has it been now since you got sober?
I don't really count several years.
So,
I
okay,
don't,
several years.
I
Yeah.
intentionally
I
don't
like
look
that you
at
don't count
the,
time. Can I
yeah,
tell you?
yeah,
There is so much emphasis on time that I think it's a double-edged sword. It can be really good, but it can also
mhm.
be really problematic. It
It can be. I
creates
mean, I think anytime you
shame.
have sort of like time you're thinking about an end date, and it sort
Yeah.
of opens up the idea that at some point, after 10 years, I'm going to decide that, it's like prison. Sobriety is, some
Prison.
people see
No,
sobriety as like a prison sentence.
no, no,
And like
no.
you've
It's
done
not
your
prison.
time, you're out on parole, it's all,
Yeah.
but
Listen, if people are listening and that's your thinking, that's not what it is. There's
no,
no
it's
end
not.
date
It's
to this.
it's
One day
it's
at a
the
time.
opposite. No, you were in prison before, now you're
Yeah.
finally free,
Now you're
you know?
free. Yeah.
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 So
So
to me, I don't think there's any reason to put a time constraint or a time definition on freedom, which is what life is.
yeah.
So
I do feel there is things change over time. Like a long period of
sure.
sobriety leads to lots of good decisions, and lots of good decisions and actions can amount to some
Mhm.
amazing things. So, I mean, you've clearly, and listen, when you and I talked, I was like, wow, this is a guy who is doing so much service work. Like, I feel like this book is really important. It's a vehicle to allow people to see themselves differently in
Mhm.
all these different movies. It kind of normalizes this idea that alcohol can be problematic. And if it is, there is a way out,
Yeah.
right? How has going through this experience of watching the movies and really analyzing the takeaways, and you're
Mhm.
extracting all these really important lessons, how has that affected you personally?
Um, you know, it I think the ability to put all these ideas that I had finally in an organized fashion in chapters talking about specific movies, there's things that just existed in my head. And I felt like I had so much to say that I was like feeling anxiety and frustration that I wasn't able to communicate that. And I thought, well, do I do a YouTube series and talk about the films, or do I do this, or do I write a blog, or do I do podcasts, or do I wait a minute, write a book? And so I realized that the book, and I'd only written screenplays, which is a very precise format. You can't really, there's not a lot of ways to deviate. The only way that you can really be creative in a screenplay, I think, is through the character dialogues, where you have to write dialogue for other people. And so there's a premium on writing other characters, not you yourself. But in nonfiction, in this book, I found that I could actually just be myself and say what I wanted to say and feel what I wanted to feel and have ideas and postulate theories and say, I'm going to put it all out there, and I hope people enjoy it and like it and think it's useful. And I'm going to give it to, some people, clinicians, therapists, scientists, leaders in the recovery world, and see what they think. And so the initial feedback from sort of like my advisory committee, as it were, was so positive that I realized that, I was onto something that could actually help people. And so I think that's been the most rewarding thing, is to be validated at that level, because
Mm,
I didn't want somebody to, you imagine worst case scenario where you're looking at your Amazon page and there's a review. Oh, I got a review. And somebody says, this book is really horrible because this guy knows nothing about addiction. You can really tell. And, there's nothing interesting to say. And like, what a boring story. And who cares about these movies? But the opposite has happened, thankfully. And I think that's because I was able to work with some people whose opinions I trust, who were very high up in the recovery community, who validated the things that I was saying as being like, that's going to be helpful, Ted. I mean, that's very, and we hadn't really thought about it in that context. So this is useful. And so when I realized that the book could be useful, that's when I started to really, get excited and put all my efforts behind it. And I felt validated that all these ideas
yeah.
that I'd been sharing in little pieces here and there in my recovery meetings or in a video here or there, I could put them all into a book.
Yeah. No, I love your spirit of wanting to help, right? Like using stories, which are so powerful, and connecting people at the heart level,
Mhm.
meeting them in that moment of need when people are searching. And I think the combination between information and entertaining
Oh yeah.
is so permeating. Is that a word? It just kind of bypasses the walls and defenses that we
Mhm.
have, because we
Yeah.
can kind of put a little distance and watch these people play out their stories, but we're still getting the lesson.
Yeah. And I'm really encouraged because actually the book has now been adopted in a treatment context.
Mm.
And there's the Canadian Drug Court in Saskatchewan has started having weekly meetings with the movies and then discussions afterwards with discussion questions that I've prepared for them. And we're
That's
starting
so
a
great.
meeting tomorrow is the first meeting at the Above and Beyond Recovery Center, which is now going to host a weekly meeting. And we have a lot of interest from sober coaches and others so now I'm actually doing the Addicted in Film workbook, which is a separate publication, which is more like a workbook with a little bit like the Smart Recovery
Yeah.
workbook, which has like question and answer and sort of allows you to interact with the movies and write down your thoughts and your questions and your answers. And I think that could be a very useful thing in therapeutic settings. So I'll be offering that for sale next year for anybody who wants to use the workbook in whatever meeting context they like.
I think the really powerful thing about workbooks is they ask the questions.
Yeah.
Right. And the questions are the things that allow us to examine our thoughts, like you were talking about earlier. Like, is this really true? What else could be going on here? It's the questions. It's like sometimes one question leads to another that lead us deeper and deeper into those places that need the examination. That's really hard to get to just like on your own, like day to day. So I'm super excited about that. I love a workbook.
Well, I just want to give you one example from the workbook. And I used this in a meeting the other day where one of the questions in the Lost Weekend is, and the premise of the film is Ben Sanderson is broke. He's now alcohol addiction, et cetera, goes to Las Vegas with the intent of killing himself slowly by just drinking himself to death. And so in the workbook, I ask, have you ever had a fantasy about, using your drug of choice to just go all the way and not hold back and just, have a fantasy about like just letting it all go? And I say, it's okay. Most people have this fantasy from time to time. Have you ever had it? And what does it look like for you? And that's a very awkward question for some, because when you talk about the question of suicide, that's a very dicey topic. But when you talk about it in the fact, like related to a film where you can see what somebody went through or is going through, it's easier to have that conversation. And then somebody answered like, yeah, you know what? I used to think that when I was like addicted to meth, I just thought, I'm gonna like break into somebody's house and find like a big stash of meth, and it's going to be enough meth for me to take meth for the rest of my life, and I'm just going to go down in a blaze of glory, and it's going to be fantastic. Oh wait, I'll die. Oh no. Yeah. So, but people sometimes have those sort of use fantasies, and it's not a bad idea to talk about them from time to time. So
yeah, I think it's important to, face the dragon and sort of process that to resolution, but it sounds like I actually can see how it opens the discussion in a safe way so that you can talk about it maybe from a little bit of a distance.
Yeah.
In a safe way.
Books are so clinical. And I think when people get new to recovery, they're like, oh, you got to read this book. Like, God, I got to read a whole book. I'm trying to get a job and get out of drug court. Like, I got a DUI. I'm like, I don't have a car. Like, they're dealing with other issues. Yeah. And so reading a book is sometimes, and it seems so clinical and seems like a lot of work. Whereas, and I did read all those books because I had the time, luckily, but not everybody does. And I do think that people should read some books, but also I found that movies could also help. And the movies can give you aha moments that like 20 books would never give you. Right. And because movies are heroic, they're emotional. People in Hollywood get paid a lot of money to connect with you emotionally. That's what makes you like movies and go back to movies. And so that emotional connection is very powerful, and that can achieve something very quickly that 10 books about addiction recovery never would.
Well, there it is, where we are looking to accelerate the healing process. And so, yeah, something that can help quickly is really important. Listen, you and I could sit here and talk all day. Can I get you to commit to coming back when your workbook is out next year?
Absolutely. It's coming out in February.
Well, that's really soon.
So. Yeah, no, but by then I hope to be in, I hope that the workbook is being used in a lot more recovery centers and a lot more drug courts.
I can see how that'd be really powerful.
And the sober coaching community has really embraced it. I mean, I think they're seeing it as a way to, engage with their clientele at a different level. And, talking about movies is never boring, I mean, I guess it could be, but But everybody likes movies, and there's something to relate to in all of them. So it's just it's just another way to engage with somebody and talk about things, and something different. You've been around the block. I've been around the block. You get to a point in mutual support meetings or conversations where it's sort of like the same old, and it's all good. It doesn't bore me, but sometimes I think, well, yeah, no, I'm familiar with that concept, and yes, I've thought about this.
You're so sweet. I'm familiar. I'm like, let's keep it moving, people.
Yeah. So this introduces just another element in a different way, and that in a way I think will open up the conversation and give it some fresh life. I hope.
Absolutely.
At least I hope. Man, that was the point of the book.
And now we have 100 movies to go check out. You have reignited my love for movies, and I have a list here that I want to revisit. And because especially some of these that have come out a long time ago, I'm old enough where I forget. And so now I get to experience them anew all over again.
Well, I knew that people would be like, oh, where do I find which movies to see? And you can go see any movies. There's tons of movies about addiction and recovery, but I did put my top 30 on the website. So if you go to my website, www.addictedinfilm.com, if you just scroll down, there's a very super helpful chart that has all of the movies that I recommend, most of which I've written about in the book. And it also has links to how to buy the DVD, how to rent the DVD, whether it's available on Netflix or not, whether you can get it for free on Hulu or not. And so that's kind of helpful. And then there's links to if you want to rent it on Amazon Prime, you can go ahead and click the button and it'll take you right to the page.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. This is so good. Thank you so much for writing this book. I mean, the work you're doing is really amazing. I know you've been doing a ton of work in the recovery field to help other people, and anybody who's trying to help our friends is a friend of mine. So thank you so much for all that you've been doing.
No, thank you for what you're doing. It takes a village.
It takes a village. Yes, it does. Well, Ted, I look forward to our future conversations. Thank you for spending some time with me today, and thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.